Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our salvation.
Amen.
The focus for the last 2 weeks has been on the interactions of John the Baptist and Jesus. 2 weeks ago, we saw the baptism of Jesus in Matthew, and last week we saw John's account, as well as his version of the calling of the disciples. This week the story moves forward in its progression to the launch of Jesus' public ministry. Matthew's account of the beginning of this ministry is different to the other synoptics. Whilst Mark and Luke simply note that Jesus preached in the synagogues, Matthew makes use of Isaiah. This is most likely because of the audience that Matthew is writing for. Matthew's gospel is targeted at a Jewish audience who are familiar with the teachings of the prophets, so Matthew uses what would have been a familiar passage from the prophet Isaiah, with the hope that the readers would recognise Jesus for who he is. Matthew is trying to make a point. Jesus is the Messiah, the liberator of the Jews, and the great light for those who sat in darkness. Following the start of Jesus' ministry is the calling of the disciples. In the text we see that the disciples are not asked. Jesus didn't say, "Would you like to come and follow me?" They didn't seek out Jesus in the same way that an apprentice would normally seek out a rabbi. But instead, he sought them out and invited them to come follow him. Matthew makes no mention of any special qualities in Peter, Andrew, James and John. The only thing we know is that they were fishermen, and Jesus told them he would make them fish for people. It is possible that Jesus sought them out because of their qualities of a good fisherman. Patience, just like waiting for the fish to take the bait. The disciples would have to show patience when fulfilling the mission that Jesus gave them, to spread the good news and go make disciples of every nation. The fishermen needed courage. Storms can rise quickly on the seas of Israel. Seeing how radical Jesus' ministry was, and they'd most likely seen the ministry of John, they would understand that there would be challenges in following Jesus. And finally, the fisherman needs to persevere. A small catch doesn't mean that they can just give up and never get back in their boats. Similar to Mark, Matthew's retelling gives no preliminary details before calling the disciples. The story is reduced to its bare essentials. Jesus summoned with authority, and they responded immediately. Whilst Matthew makes no mention of the disciples asking any questions, the most likely outcome is that they had already heard or seen the works of Jesus, and being Jewish men, they would have grown up in Jewish schools and already know what it meant to be told, "Follow me," by a rabbi. They must leave their possessions and businesses behind to follow Jesus. There are no suggestions of if and how they will be provided for. They will stay where Jesus stays. They will eat what Jesus eats. If that means they were without food or shelter, then so be it. They must also leave their families behind, which in first century Jewish customs was disrespectful and insulting at best to the family members that they left. To put it plainly, Matthew makes no apologies of what the call to discipleship means. To try and put this into context. Imagine you were Abraham, and God told you that he wanted you to sacrifice your child. Could you do it? Jesus' call hasn't changed over the years, and he hasn't reduced his demands. Jesus doesn't wait for people to apply unto him. He instead seeks them out, and there is no qualification, save the willingness to lay down everything else. After doing the questionnaire that Stephen gave us last week, I found the areas that I'm lacking in my discipleship walk. One would think that someone who is studying theology and has as much time as I do would devote more time to prayer and study of the scriptures. But as I filled out the questionnaire, I realised that I often don't even set aside time in my day for morning and evening prayer. So I must now challenge myself to give up some of my time that I spend doing other things and devote that to prayer and meditation. So for those of you who did the survey, what did you get out of it?
Good. Very good at all.
So just what is it we are called to do as Christians? It would seem that too often we answer in terms that require too little of us. Some would say that we are called to belief. Others would say we are called to church membership or to service. But in reality, it is all these things and more. I probably won't always enjoy giving up my time, but the call to discipleship means there are times when I will have to make sacrifices of my own wants for God. So without repeating what has already been said, today I challenge you to take a good, long, hard look at how you live and ask yourself, am I following Jesus without hesitation? And if you're not, how can you fix it?